While I'm less than excited about the all-in comics coming from DC this week, Batman wrestles with the value of human life in a very interesting and a very personal way. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. This is your first and only warning. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on November 20th and originally published on October 23rd. I've got a number of books to get through. Most of them I'm just going to make brief comments on and then focus in on Detective Comics at the end. First off, I read Absolute Wonder Woman #1, and I've read a few of these Absolute so-and-so issues so far, and I'm getting a sense of what this is, and it's not what I'd hoped. I originally got the impression that it was going to be a sort of a DC version of the Ultimate Marvel line, where it's a version of the DC universe that's very similar to the main DC universe, but has a separate continuity and a slightly different take, maybe a slightly modernized, quote-unquote, take on different characters. But no, this is so wildly different. It's a world in which I think like Darkseid has taken over, and so everybody, all the heroes you know, Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, they all have these much darker kind of origins and stuff. Wonder Woman was instead raised in like hell or something like that. And I'm just like, nah, I'm not really into it. It just feels like a really fleshed out Elseworld at some point, and it doesn't seem like it's going to really go the distance as its own continuity that readers will be following. I'd be surprised if it really took off to that degree to last any significant amount of time. And so I think it'll probably tie into whatever is going on with the All-In initiative, since it has the All-In branding. But unlike the mainstream All-In branded DC Comics, these are in their own universe that I suppose at some point will have a crossover adventure with the main universe, but other than that, it just seems completely irrelevant to me. So I'm honestly not very interested in the Absolute stuff. Green Arrow 17. This, of course, is the first issue after the big events of Absolute Power, where Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, had gone undercover to take on Amanda Waller from the inside of her organization. Of course, throughout that crossover, we were led to believe that he actually agreed with Waller and was legitimately siding with her, which I thought would have been so interesting and made him so much more of a striking, morally complex character and a morally complex book to read. But of course, at the end of Absolute Power, we found out he was willingly, with the help of Martian Manhunter, kind of brainwashing himself so that she wouldn't be able to tell, even if she used mind readers, that he was actually not on her side. Well, that was super disappointing. Now, coming back in Green Arrow 17, at first in the opening pages, they imply that although he seemed hunky-dory and relationship restored with all the members of the Justice League, he was like, well, that was kind of like in the afterglow of the moment. I do need to have a proper follow-up with all these guys and kind of let them know what was going on and that I'm actually not sorry for any of it. Well, he has this big old kind of conversation, this spouts out a monologue, all this kind of stuff like, I'm not going to apologize, and da-da-da-da. And they're like, hold on, Ollie, hold on. You're in the league. Everything's okay. And I'm like, really? All of that? You had this great opportunity to suggest that maybe the healing of their his relationship with the other leaguers was just kind of an in-the-moment thing, and as people thought about it afterwards, maybe they weren't so settled, maybe they weren't so ready to trust Oliver Queen again. But nope, they are. It really is just as hunky-dory as it seemed to be at the end of Absolute Power. I mean, there's the suggestion, more than a suggestion, that his much closer supporting cast, kind of like the Arrow family, if you will, is not as ready to forgive him. But still, the way that dialogue is handled, it's just a little bit too smiley and simplistic. And this is interesting because by the end of this issue, what he seems to be setting up is the idea that he is going back to his roots. He's going to take on corporate fat cats. It's just going to be him and a bow and arrow. No more of this crazy space and time traveling stuff that this run of Green Arrow started with, and I am grateful for that. I'm actually interested, very interested, in Green Arrow stories that are very street level, and that have some of that, well, I'm not really interested in like politically charged stories. I know that's probably going to come with Green Arrow the more grounded you get him, but at least grounded stories that have some more kind of thought-provoking moral complexity to them. I think that's what street-level superhero stories can do really well. And so it just seems like another missed opportunity to have this initiative expressed where he is going back to the street level, back to take on the corporate fat cats, back to what Green Arrow, I think, I don't know the history well enough, but my impression is that conceptually this is what he was about from the beginning. We're going back to that, and yet we are tossing aside this great opportunity in his own character for him to be morally complex, and a character that we as readers agree with at times and disagree with strongly at other times, so I don't know. But that's Green Arrow 17. I guess ultimately I'll see what happens in 18. It's like, okay, you've now established what the new status quo is going to be. Now go ahead and execute on that, and let me see what you offer. But I'm not optimistic for the future of Green Arrow. And again, that's Green Arrow 17. Moving on to Nightwing number 119. This one, I don't have a sense yet of what is the kind of all-in element of this all-in branded Nightwing story beginning in Nightwing 119. We've got a bunch of crime bosses meeting together at the beginning of the issue who are agreeing to at least de-escalate their conflict for the sake of making money, since their street wars are ultimately losing them money as different criminal organizations. And Nightwing crashes this meeting, getting ready to take all of them to jail, but it turns out some external party to all of them present planted a bomb there. It blew up, killed the heads of all these gangs, and now Nightwing is trying to make the best of the chaos that ensues after that, as all the surviving gang members and the second-in-commands are once again at war, because they're like, hey, it's so-and-so's fault, it's their fault, so there's just kind of chaos. He's trying to keep that under control while he figures out what's going on. There's also kind of the reintroduction of Dick Grayson's, I can't remember if it's sister or her half-sister, either way, kind of this long-lost sister that was recently reintroduced to the continuity, I don't know, a few years back maybe. Her name is Melinda. She is now the mayor of Bloodhaven, which is the city that Nightwing kind of is responsible for as a hero. So there's a reintroduction of her a bit, but it's unclear where things are going. Basically, right now with Nightwing, I feel like they're just kind of setting up pieces for something that presumably will hook me a lot more, but I don't feel really hooked by the beginning of this story in Nightwing 119. Next, we have Superman 19, which surprisingly starts without any explanation, with Lois Lane having Superman's powers. Now, presumably, this is a result of the Amazos at the end of Absolute Power returning powers to the characters that they stole them from, but something's getting mixed up in the process. So I'm guessing that in some way Superman is now sharing his powers with Lois, which is of course an interesting dynamic with them being husband and wife, and her now being in the thick of things with him, but him wanting to keep her safe, but also help her to understand and learn how to use her new powers. So I think there's some potential here. I don't really want this to be a very long story. I think, 3 to 6 issues, and then let's get things back to normal. I'm less interested in these kind of status quo gimmick changes and more in like, let's dive into the character more. If this status quo change can help facilitate that, great. But otherwise, the gimmick itself is not something I'm very interested in. However, there was one moment that did allow for kind of a character beat because of this change. Doomsday shows up in Metropolis, and suddenly Clark is faced with the prospect of taking on this essentially unbeatable foe with his wife right along with him in the mix, and of course he does not want her to be in danger at all. Lois initially has a wide-eyed, shocked expression seeing Doomsday and realizing that, what she's just inches away from maybe experiencing herself or getting in the thick of. And we have a flashback moment where she is clearly remembering holding the dead body of her then fiance, Clark, in her arms, who had just defeated Doomsday but paid the price of his own life. And she was completely, of course, shattered by that. But then a very appropriate kind of next panel, after, she's in the shock of that, she snaps over, her eyes blaze red with heat vision, and she says, "Let's do this," with an angry expression on her face. And at first, that just for a split second caught me the wrong way. I was like, what is she? Why is she suddenly just all like, "I'm a superhero"? But then I realized from the expression on her face, no. She is angry. She remembers just how she was destroyed by the death of Clark. And now she is in a position where she can dish out some payback. So I find that actually very satisfying emotionally, in terms of like just bringing out what Lois would have been feeling at that time, and for the first time ever being in a position to do something and to take it out on the one that killed her husband. Now, that said, I've got some concerns about Doomsday coming back. Doomsday only functions well when he shows up and kills Superman. There's very few exceptions to that rule, but almost every time that he has showed up, the story has ended with me feeling less in awe and less concerned about the next time Doomsday will show up. He just is dealt with a little bit too easily. I feel like he's kind of an all too easy device that writers can grab to maybe quickly and easily drum up some sense of tension and stakes. But even doing that once and having it resolved too quickly, too easily, compared to when the time that he killed Superman, it makes him less impactful as a character next time. And unfortunately, he has showed up and not killed Superman far more times than he has killed Superman at this point. So when he shows up, I at least want a very deep cost by the time that story is done. I think someone needs to die so that every time he lives up to his name, and we know that, you know what? Someone's going to die. This is going to leave a mark on the DC universe that's not going to be forgotten. Even if it's just like a supporting cast member of Superman, he needs to kill like a Jimmy level type character when he shows up, if he's not going to kill Superman. Otherwise, he just loses his power and he's just a bunch of noise, and I'm waiting for that story to get resolved. Right now, honestly, I don't have any concerns that he's going to do anything significant. So, yeah, not excited on that level. Moving on then, The Flash, number 14. I believe Simon Spurrier, if that's how you say his name, is the same writer that's been writing him up to this point, and I've not been excited about the story, as it's been a lot of technobabble and stuff. Now it's going in a different direction, still focused on Wally, but his family is like on vacation in Skartaris, like this underworld realm of sorcery. It turns out it's more than just vacation, even though that's what he's telling his family, because he wants to convince them that they're more important to him ultimately than his life of superheroing and stuff. But it turns out that they are kind of there so he can do some superheroing that needs to be done. There's something about the tone of the book that's not working for me. Between the slightly more cartoony look to the art style and the kind of upbeat, pseudo-whimsical tone of the writing and the dialogue, it feels like it's a book that's intended to appeal to older kids, and maybe their parents or their dads. I kind of see it as it's not written for those who are parents, because I think that unless they're particularly into this kind of younger skewing vibe, it feels in some ways like a family movie, like a Pixar animated movie, where you're not going to fill a theater of a Pixar movie with just adults. There's going to be a lot of kids in there too. But at the same time, they're trying to write it in a way that'll have something for the adults too. So it feels like they're trying to go for this broad, quote unquote, family movie kind of audience with the vibe here. And I'm not really into that. I love leveraging the fact that Wally West is married and has kids. But just because a character is married and has kids doesn't mean that it should be a book written for a wide range of children and parents and adults, So I'm also not a fan of the costume change for some reason, and it seems very arbitrary at this point. Maybe there'll be some explanation, because there's still some stuff that Wally has, some choices he's made behind the scenes that he hasn't told his family, and the audience doesn't know yet as well. But he's got a costume change where like half of his costume is now black, and I don't understand why this costume change is happening. It feels very arbitrary. So yeah, the book right now, the tone feels weightless. It feels like changes are being made for reasons that I don't understand. I guess I'll just have to read a few more issues, see where it's going. But right now, if I was paying money for this, like as an individual issue as opposed to a subscription where I just get access to everything DC's doing, I would be bummed for having spent money on this, and it would probably be very hesitant to spend money on future issues. The one book this week that I was very happy with, and surprisingly so, was Detective Comics number 1090, written now by Tom Taylor. So we're finally getting away from that very long story arc in Detective Comics that involved like Esmer demons or something, some weird supernatural stuff. I just never got into that storyline. And so when I saw that a new writer was taking over, I was like, great. Part of the All In initiative as well, which is supposed to be a good jumping on point, and written by Tom Taylor, whose stuff I tend to enjoy. And I definitely appreciated and was intrigued by what Tom Taylor is bringing us in this first issue. The story opens with an unidentified villain about to execute someone in front of Batman, telling him that this guy deserves it. Every life I've taken up to this point was for you. This guy deserves it more than any of them. Surely you of all people can see. He gets interrupted by Batman, who punches and says no. And that really introduces the theme that we're dealing with in this story, which is Batman's view that no one deserves to just be kind of executed, particularly outside of the halls of justice, as it were, without going through due process. And they all deserve a chance at going through that system rather than just being executed by someone who wants revenge or whatever, or just makes a judgment call on them that their life is worthless, So it gets to the heart of like why Batman doesn't kill even some of these terrible villains and criminals that he ends up hunting down and bringing in. And so I love the idea that we're going to dive into why that is and poke at that a little bit and see if any of it will give in Batman's character and in his thinking. And a main way that this is explored is by a flashback story taking up most of the issue, I think, about Bruce's father, Thomas Wayne, who, according to this faceless villain, made a mistake that he doesn't want Batman to make. Who he calls Batman directly Bruce, and so he evidently knows his identity. But he says, don't make the same mistake as your father, Bruce, and then that takes us into a flashback story in this issue. In this story, a woman is brought into the hospital after like a car accident, and her injuries are not as severe as the driver's injuries, but they notice that she's pregnant and that she has injuries that predate the accident that they were just in. So strong evidence that she was being abused by her boyfriend who was driving the car, whose injuries are much more severe, who will die if he's not treated immediately. There's another doctor at the hospital that basically tries to say to Thomas, hey, this boyfriend is a monster. That's clear from the evidence. Why don't you just tend to her injuries and just let him die is what's being unspoken there. But Thomas says, no, I'm here. I've taken an oath. I am not going to allow him to die. We don't do that, and we're going to pretend that this conversation never happened. That is not anything that I'm ever going to put on the table. And so he follows through on that. And the criminal that was beating this woman, who she's so afraid of him, she wants to hide the fact that she's pregnant from him so that he can never find his daughter. She doesn't want him in their life at all. And that opportunity is afforded them by Thomas's wife, Martha, Bruce's mom, finding them a safe place where she can raise her child. But it turns out that the criminal that Thomas saved from dying from his injuries was none other than Joe Chill, the criminal that would later be responsible for gunning down Thomas and Martha Wayne. And, of course, they won't know any of this. They may not even know it when the night comes, that fated night when they're gunned down. It might have happened too fast. We don't know yet based on this story if there was a moment of realization when Joe Chill was about to fire on them, like, oh, this is the guy that that I saved and then released or whatever. So, but like here and now, just knowing what they do about him being abusive to his girlfriend, there's a conversation back at home between Thomas and Martha where she's having trouble with the choice that he made. She's like, what you can do, it's almost miraculous how you can save lives, but did this guy deserve that miracle? And he's a monster. And Thomas Wayne says, my Hippocratic oath didn't come with an asterisk, Martha. So he is just committed to that value. Well, Bruce, actually, as a young boy, overhears this and comes into the conversation and says, if this man did what you said he did, why did you save him? And this is where it gets interesting, talking about the value of human life. Thomas Wayne says, we don't know how a life will be lived. We don't know its value. And this is where I'm like, okay. So at a glance, what this looks like to me is the very kind of a humanist, secular, pseudo-atheistic idea that a life is given value in proportion to its output, in proportion to how moral someone is, or what someone accomplishes, or what someone does for other people. Like that human has value in proportion to those things. Now, is that what's meant here? I'm not so sure, because he does say we don't know how a life will be lived. We don't know its value. So when he's talking about a life, he's not necessarily using life as a synonym for person. He's just talking about life as an accumulation of activity. And there certainly is worthiness to our activity, and there certainly is a sense in which the accumulated collection of our activities can have greater value depending on the choices that we make. That is absolutely true, and there will be rewards for those who make worthwhile choices, and there will be punishment and lack of rewards to the degree that we don't make the choices that we should in eternity. So yeah, just getting into the semantics of this is a little bit tricky to figure out what's going on here. Well, then we flash forward to present day. Batman's on patrol. He's been kind of ruminating on these things. Oracle tells him that, or he helps him he hears shots fired, so he goes to check out. It's like a grocery store, convenience store type gunning by a young boy who did not actually mean to fire the gun, but it went off anyway, and he freaks out and starts to call an ambulance. Well, at that moment, Batman crashes in the window, and even though the boy is panicked, says, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, he gets smacked across the face by Batman, and it just feels kind of brutal in that moment. And I love how that is making me feel about Batman. Like, I'm thinking to myself, ooh, that feels like overkill. There's very few Batman stories that kind of call attention to the idea of Batman maybe being a little too harsh on some criminals, or maybe some, because most of the time they're all portrayed as these one-note villains that don't have another side to their story. And so, of course, as readers, we're fine with him beating the crap out of them because they are nothing but bad. But this is a situation that is very different from that. And even by the end of this story, Batman has a degree of regret about how he handled this situation. He chases the boy down, finds him dead in the sewer, having been killed by someone else. And standing over the body, he reflects on the fact that he hit this boy, that he hit him, and that he ran because he was scared of Batman. And Batman was not able to keep this death, this murder of this boy from happening. And so he's kind of pinning this on himself, that this boy ran away and met the fate that he did because of the way Batman handled that situation. Well, another part of why that situation happened was because Batman couldn't keep up. And Oracle kind of comments that, like, yeah, you're wearing a ton of Kevlar, you've had a ton of knee surgeries. And so there's this sense of Batman coming to grips with his frailty, his mortality, and different stories will handle this in different ways. And I think that you can have that flexibility with Batman as soon as you want to write him as someone who is the absolute peak of physical perfection as far as any human being could possibly be. Well, all you have to do is have him visit some weird shaman that can do something to his knee so that, you know, it's like he never had all those surgeries. Even though it's not a superhuman knee now, it kind of hits the reset button conveniently. But you can also then have stories like this that are saying, oh, no, actually, it's starting to add up. And he's pushing against his limits. And I like stories that do that. And it looks like they're really leveraging this because a main thread that's being started here is Batman reconnecting with kind of like a woman that he sees in some ways, I think, is like a younger half-sister or something like that, who is actually the baby of the abused girlfriend that was kind of rescued by Martha Wayne. Well, she is grown up now, and she is running this company that has this new product that increases dramatically people's longevity and actually can, to some degree, reverse aging. And she's basically offering this to Bruce, even though it's hugely and prohibitively expensive to most people. She wants Bruce to have it. She said, I'd like you to be one of a select few to benefit. He says, why me? She says, because some lives are worth more than others, Bruce. And in his thought box, he says, there is no part of me that believes that. So that leads me to go back and think, okay, so whatever Thomas Wayne meant by what he said, the net result of his philosophy passed down to Bruce is that no human life is worth more than others. Or no human being, maybe. Again, she's saying some lives are worth more than others. I think here she means some people are worth more than others, not the way some lives are lived are worth more than the way some other lives are lived, you know. It's a little tricky to track the philosophy here, but I think I can be on board with what's undergirding this. Because as Christians, we would say that what gives human life immense value is not the, frankly, weak output that even the best of us can produce compared to Jesus, but rather the fact that we are made in some way in the image of God, separated from the rest of creation, of living creation, in that facet of who we are, what we are. And the other thing that I think arguably makes us even more valuable is that God would live as one of us, become as one of us, live a human life, and then die on our behalf so that he could be in close relationship, good relationship with us justly forever. That boggles the mind why God would do that, but certainly that assigns greater worth to every individual human being than any acts that they could do to add to that, and that would in some way increase their significance. So I can be on board with this idea that all human life is equally valuable. Thomas Wayne just muddied the waters a little bit when he said we don't know how a life is lived. Anyway, Bruce is definitely considering this. And so I'm interested to see where it goes, how they might continue to play with both ideas of his frailty and mortality and kind of him pushing up against that, and then also the idea of saving the lives and giving value, assigning value in our minds to even those who are living their lives terribly. I think there's a lot of opportunity for some really interesting and worthwhile stuff to be said or at least reflected on in this story. For my ring selection this week, I have chosen the green ring, which is the one I use when I'm trying to kind of sort through, discern through things that take some focused will to kind of like think through some things. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the idea here? What are we saying here in Detective Comics 1090? So that's kind of like, I guess, the feeling that I'm left with. But yeah, those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions to any of the comics that I've talked about here, or any of the comics that I didn't cover this week. You can leave those in the comments below. As always, I hope you'll check out our podcast and a ton of other content made for you over at christiangeekcentral.com, where we are endeavoring to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.